permission,
Well,
I'm gonna start recording. I know you are on the floor and you are voting and you're busy.
well, all is true, and I may leave for a while, go cast a vote, then come back. So we'll see.
Okay,
At some point, I have to break away, but right now, it's let's just get going.
okay, very good. With your permission, I already started recording. We said it's gonna start at 6. People are still joining, but I understand your time is short, so it's going to be recorded. You can start. I really appreciate your coming, by the way, despite your busy schedule. In my email to the community, I told them, let's show the congressman that we care, so we stay visible, we stay connected. After the election, we will be heard and everything, and I'm glad we already are.
Yes, you are.
Thank you.
Whenever you'd like to go, you just let me know. I'm just work through some papers in a few moments, and then we'll have at it.
Sure, sure. Very good. Again. And please, it's 6 p.m. I know you have a limited time, so please.
Thank you very, very much. I'm delighted to be with you, Shahila. Did I say that correctly?
Sohaila, yes. Thank you.
Delighted to be with you, and thank you for the opportunity to talk to you and all of your guests on the show. Yeah, I'm on the floor of the House of Representatives. We started a voting series early in the afternoon and did some very, very important votes that I'll talk about in a few moments. And then this evening, we're having another series of votes. It'll probably go on for the next, began at 8:30, probably go to probably 12 o'clock tonight. And some very, very important votes are up right now. The vote that I did vote on just a few moments ago was a bill to deal with domestic terrorism. And we see plenty of that in our nation, unfortunately. And then we've got a couple more bills, well, about 5 or 6 bills coming up later. The one that comes up next is condemning the rising anti-Semitism. And so we're dealing with the issues of the day in America, the racism, the violence that we're seeing, the horrible shooting in Buffalo, which is just the latest of many, many racially motivated shootings. And so I keep hearkening back to legislation that I carried in 1988 when I represented Stockton, California in the California State Senate. At that time, we had the Cleveland shooting, which was the first assault weapon shooting in America. The fellow was shot up, I think, 6 young Hmong children and a couple of teachers, and another half a dozen were injured. So I carried a piece of legislation to ban assault weapons in California. That bill moved along. Ultimately, it got stalled in the Senate, and I handed it over to David Roberti, who was then the pro tem, the leader of the Senate, and we ultimately got it passed. Dianne Feinstein followed shortly thereafter with a federal ban. Unfortunately, the federal legislation was sunsetted after 10 years. And now we have these weapons all over the place. California remains with bans on the assault weapons, although it appears as though judges may want to do away with that. We have a very real problem, and hopefully we can deal with it. We passed legislation here on various gun safety measures, background checks and the like. All of them have died in the Republican-controlled Senate. So it's going to be an interesting night. We have veterans bills. We have some specific bills dealing with veterans, mothers, veteran claims and the like. So it's going to be a night of dealing with veterans laws, much of which we've done in the past. So if you have questions, I'd love to answer those questions as we go along. And for your audience, if I slip away for a few moments, my chief of staff, Bradley, is on the call. He'll step in while I'm gone. I'm in what is known as the cloakroom and in one of the ancient phone booths. just off the floor. The floor of the house is about 10 feet away. I can keep my eye on the voting board, and when they call votes, I'll jump up, go cast a vote on the appropriate bill, then come back and join you. So it shouldn't take very long, Sahila.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. So are you leaving now or do we have time for a question?
Oh, let's go to questions. I'll let you know when I leave, but right now,
Okay.
just a heads up for everybody. If you see me leave, that's why.
Sure,
I'll leave
sure.
I'll leave the video on.
Okay, I take the privilege of being running the show and ask the first question, and then I let
Good.
Michelle and others. So we are concerned that our area, Richmond, Fairfield, Vallejo, Antioch, it's not a very affluent area. It's relatively under privileged, high crime rate. We have refineries and we have warehouses. We hope you help us bring a diverse set of businesses and change the face of community. We don't even have a nice restaurant to go to, even though average price of homes are over $800,000 in this area.
Well, there's a whole series of issues that you just laid out. I'm going to start answering your question with what I learned from a study that I conducted in 1987 about the future of California. I was then on a very special select committee that the California Senate put together, and hired Stanford Research Institution to do the economic study. And anyway, the report of it and the upside of it was that if California wanted to have a strong economy, who wanted to have an equitable distribution of the wealth that that economy could create, and create a social justice system in California where everybody would have access, we needed to do 5 things. It turns out that this was the history of California following World War II. First of all, the very best education system in the world. That is pre-K all the way through the advanced degrees at the universities. We have a great system in the advanced education, post-secondary. Unfortunately, the pre-K and K through 12 system is really failing. And specifically for the communities that I represent. You can take Vallejo, you started at Antioch and go all the way down the river, Pittsburgh, continue all the way to Richmond and the like. We simply are not investing in our education system. And so that's the very first thing that needs to be done. Right now, the state of California has an awesome surplus. Some say it's as much as $90 billion. And yet I see nobody talking about making that, using that money to really enhance our education system. In many of these school districts, a starting teacher salary is less than $50,000. And so we're short of teachers in every one of our schools. We can go into that in detail if you like, but that's a fact. Also, counselors are not there. And in many of these school districts, the kids do not see any hope coming from education. The second piece of this is that not every kid is going to go to a post-secondary school education, not going to go to the colleges. And so job training and employment training and apprenticeship programs are critically important. Yesterday, we passed a crucial piece of legislation, a bill that I've been working on for 30 years now. And that is what we call the Workforce Investment and Opportunity Act. And essentially what it is, it's the federal government financing state and local job training programs, including the connection of employers to those jobs, to those employment training centers, including in that everything from apprenticeship programs at the unions to the community colleges, everything in between. And so what I'm weaving here is a web of potential success with one more element in it. There are jobs out there. A month ago, I met with the owner of Mare Island dry dock company. They repair ships at the Mare Island dry docks. I persuaded him to make an investment of some $13 million in the dry dock system there. He said he would do that. I said, if you do that, you'll be able to bid for the combat naval vessels. He will probably be successful in those bids. And if he does, there'll be 2,000 starting jobs at that with the machinist union. And those wages will be somewhere starting salary $80,000 to $100,000. So we can create jobs. And so if we look at the education systems and the post-secondary and secondary job training programs, couple those with employers that are in the area that are really short of employees, we can create well-paying jobs. Now, that doesn't deal necessarily with the housing program, although I am carrying a bill that would reauthorize for the first time in some 20 years the federal home financing, home and apartment financing system. We are significantly increasing that program with this piece of legislation. And should that bill become law, and I hope it will, it's moving along, it will provide significantly more federal financing assistance for the necessary housing, multifamily as well as single family housing in these communities. Finally, a word about the environment in the area. In the 1930s, when the federal government started its housing programs, they redlined most of Richmond because it was an industrial city. That red line basically prevented the federal government from financing homes in that area. Also, we found this all the way down along the Bay, the East Bay area where there were industrial zones. That has set in place a pattern of insufficient financing. That same redlining was in the insurance system when I became insurance commissioner in 1991. It was brought to my attention by people in Richmond and Berkeley and Alameda and also down in the Hayward area. We looked into that, found that there was systemic redlining for insurance. This was for auto insurance, homeowners insurance. I simply put a stop to it. I made that illegal and also required that the insurance be available at a reasonable price. So these are just 4 different issues that deal directly with the question that you have.
Thank you very much. Michelle, you had a question?
I did. Thank you, Sohaila. Congressman Garamendi, I'm sure you're aware of the fact that the area that we are in is like a health desert, emergency facility desert, and with Alta Bates being set to close in 8 years, it's going to be an even longer trek to a full hospital from this area. If you're having a heart attack in the commute hour, you can just stay home and forget about it. So I'm wondering, is there anything that we can do to encourage development of a new hospital, a major hospital in this corner of the Bay Area? So we don't need to cross a bridge to get to care, and we can not have to go through bumper-to-bumper traffic.
Well, there are at least 3 different things here. In the Infrastructure and Jobs Act, there is some money for upgrading hospitals. As to whether there's ever going to be enough to start a hospital, that remains to be seen. You do have a very significant hospital in Richmond. In fact, it was the very first Kaiser hospital ever built. The Kaiser medical system has rapidly expanded over the last decade, but it has not expanded in Richmond. I would suspect that more than a few of you that are on this call are insured in the Kaiser system. But it would seem to me that it is important for the community, and I've heard this complaint over and over again, to reach out to the Kaiser system and ask them why they are not making an investment in the emergency trauma system at that hospital. I do know that they have made very, very significant investments in the South Sacramento area. My son-in-law is a emergency room physician at that facility, and they continually expand that emergency room, which is also a trauma center. So it is possible. And I would suggest that the first place to go to address the emergency room problem is the Kaiser facility. And I will join with the community at a, not this week, we're busy, but over the course of this campaign, I know that system well. In fact, my wife and I have been in that system for 50 years now, and I know the organization. And so as I learn more about this particular problem, the question needs to come up insofar as an emergency room is the question. And I know it's much more than that. But if that is the fundamental problem of immediate access, I would start with an existing hospital. Now, beyond that, the state of California does have a system much different than when I was in the California legislature and lieutenant governor. But that system still has the responsibility of making sure that there are adequate medical facilities in all the communities. And clearly the Richmond, Berkeley, El Cerrito, and including Oakland are underserved. Final point on this is that in the American Rescue Plan, the big bill that came in just days after Biden became president, that $1 trillion bill had a significant expansion of the clinics. And the clinic systems are growing in this region, in these communities. That's not emergency care, but it is critically important care.
Yeah.
Final point on this is the insurance system itself. When I came to Congress in 2009, at which time I did represent El Cerrito and Kensington as well as Antioch, the very first bill, the day I arrived, and hours after being sworn in, was the Affordable Care Act. I provided the necessary final vote, the 218th vote, to move that bill out of the House of Representatives. Unfortunately, the Senate modified it, took away the public option, and 9 months later, it did come back to the House of Representatives. And once again, I was among those 218 people that passed the Affordable Care Act. That now provides insurance, not the best, but provides insurance to all of what's about 90% of Californians who do not have other insurance in any other way. You may have heard that little knock, knock on the door of this ancient phone booth. There's another vote going on. I'm going to step out, make sure I know what vote it is and what I'm voting on. And I should be back within 5 minutes. In the meantime, Bradley Bottoms, my chief of staff, is on, and he can take the next question. And I'll be back very, very soon.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Did he actually cover what he's voting on today, by the way, the exact bills that he's doing? Because it'll be pretty exciting to, just in case. They just voted, and actually right now we just switched over. It's to a supplemental appropriations bill on infant formula. I don't know if you've been following the news. Infant formula, there's a huge shortage, and babies, especially low-income ones on WIC, are going hungry. So it's a $28 million appropriation bill. We're technically doing the Republican motion to commit right now. So he's going to vote no on that so we can actually get this bill passed. It's an obstacle that they put up. They just did one that gives waiver authority to the FDA that allows them to go and procure safe, non-US based infant formula to cover that. So just a little bit of context. And if he didn't talk about his day, something that you all might find interesting since you're all from Richmond, he just celebrated a bill that he actually passed in 2020 called the Merchant Mariner World War II Gold Medal Act. And they had the ceremony today. And why I say as Richmond residents, you'll find this interesting, is these are the merchant mariners in World War II that got on the Liberty ships made in the Kaiser shipyards. And they provided, we call them the sustainers of the fight. They brought the food, the fuel, the ammunition to actually win the war. And unfortunately, because they were riding those Liberty ships and not a combatant command ship, they sustained the highest death rate of any service in the entire military. And until the 80s, they actually didn't have any access to the VA system or anything like that. So we actually had a few in the house today, including a 102-year-old gentleman, Charles Mills, who is one of the survivors. Sorry, Susan, I see you had a question. You're on mute.
Unmute yourself, please.
Yes, thank you, but it's on a different topic, so I didn't want to interrupt you.
No, please go. Really answer questions.
My interest is in the GPO and the WEP. Are you familiar with those two?
Oh, of course, the windfall provision.
Right. I'm a retired educator.
And I will say quickly, my sister is a high school history teacher, and he has, sir, I don't know how many teachers you have in your family, but it's a whole lot of them. So
I have a small family. It's pretty much just me. But the thing is, I did do moonlighting for many years, and I had some Social Security quarters built up, and a little bit of money coming to me, and I held on to it as they recommended until age 70, when the WEP applied that formula that you're probably aware of, and it's applied every year. It's basically half the $500 or so I'm supposed to have coming in from 20 plus years of moonlighting. Now what's happening is it's so inadequate. I have to pay Social Security every year now. I would really love it if you guys would, get rid of the WEP, and for those who have have spouses, and they can't get their spousal benefit if they're in education.
Susan, if I might interrupt you, we've been dealing with this every year.
I know.
And we've not been able to get it passed.
I'm begging.
We're working on the two different ways this is going on. One is to deal with it as a single bill, and that has not worked. There will come soon, and we tried to do it this year, we tried to do it last year, and that is a major reform of the Social Security system. That's probably our best chance to deal with this. John Larson from Connecticut is the principal leader of the effort to do this, and I've been working with him for the last 5 or 6 years now to get that done. And Bradley, just to let all of you know that it's really, really important to know what you're voting on. Bradley told me it dealt with the appropriation for the emergency appropriation for the formula. It turned out that it wasn't that at all. So the first time I voted yes on a Republican motion to kill the previous bill. So I had to hustle down to the well of the chamber and change my vote. So it took me a little longer than I thought. One of the when we do these, we usually have somewhere 5 to 10 minutes between each vote, and it's really important to know exactly what is up, because that was a quick change. It was scheduled to be exactly what Bradley said, but they made a change right at the last moment and put up this what's called a recommit, which is an effort to kill the previous bill that was up for a vote. Anyway, let's go on. Susan, thank you for that issue. It's a tough one. It is not fair. It's grossly unfair in so many ways. However, we've just not been able to push it through, but as of now. Shahila, let's move on to another question, if you would.
I was just last thing. A lot of the people listening might not know what we're talking about. So maybe a really quick summation would be good. Thanks.
Well, there's two things that are going on here. First of all, in a Social Security reform about almost 30 years ago now, earnings by a public employee that were made before they became public employees, for example, teachers, those earnings were not allowed to be considered Social Security earnings, principally because some of these organizations do not pay into the Social Security system, even though teachers like Susan may have spent the first 10, 20 years of their life in any other sector where you did pay Social Security. In addition to that, they may require, as Susan said, that you're paying income tax on your Social Security, so you're getting it going and coming. That's the short version of it. There's a lot more complexities to it, but that's a basic outline of it.
Thank you. Amy?
Okay. Congressman, thank you for taking the time to talk with us today. And my question is a little bit different than what you've heard so far. I'm actually really glad that we get a lot of sun here. So that's one of the real benefits to this area. We're not in the fog bank. And I know in the past, there have been federal supports for solar installation. And especially with the kind of growing need to have power shutoffs due to the fires, it would be really nice to be able to have more people be sort of self-sufficient power-wise in these power shutoffs. And I just wonder if there's any possibility of getting federal support for homeowners to be installing solar.
Amy, the answer is absolutely yes, Amy. The federal government has today and has continued for the last almost 20 years a solar credit, so that a significant portion, let's say your solar system's $20,000 to $30,000, I think the credit is almost a third of that is a credit. The state government has a similar program. However, be aware that there's an effort by the utility companies to eliminate, significantly reduce a very, very important part of another state program, which is the program of net metering, which basically uses the grid as the battery system. That basically allows a homeowner who has a solar array to put energy into the grid and then draw energy out of the grid, so that there may be a net negative, or maybe you're paying very, very little for your PG&E bill. Watch very, very closely what the Public Utility Commission is doing here. It very may well be that they will kill a major incentive to install solar and stop or slow down the installation of solar. We cannot go green unless we have solar and wind power continuing to grow and to be used in California. Now, one more point. In 1978, I was a senator, and I authored the first tax credit in the nation for solar, wind, and conservation, allowing you to write off against your taxes the installation cost of solar, wind, and home conservation. For example, putting insulation in your attic. That started the wind industry in California. If you go over the Altamont Pass someday, you'll notice there's some very old derelict wind turbines. They're broken, the blades are broken. They haven't yet been replaced. Those actually started in the early 80s as a result of my legislation. I'm all in on this. We have to do this. We've got to reduce our carbon emissions. And this is one of the very best ways we have to do it. Thank you so very much, Amy.
Thank you.
I see no hands, and I have one question for you, Congressman. You talked about education. The question is about equity. The more affluent area you live in, the better schools you have because your taxes, the price of the home is high, you pay higher taxes, school is better, the price of home increases further up, the PTA is more active, there are more schools, so it's a positive feedback group, and the opposite in less privileged areas like ours. Similarly with parks. Our incorporated area, even our portion of the city, we don't even have one park with a bathroom. Alamo, our neighboring, well, not exactly neighboring, but unincorporated area, they have 11 parks. We asked why, they say they pay out of their own taxes. What do you suggest in the same with education? We have education issue, schools, parks, everything. Is there anything that can be done about it?
There are three things. First of all, when the Prop 13 and the GAN limit passed back in the late 70s, early 80s, I, together with two other members of the California legislature, rewrote the financing for public education. And we rewrote it in a way that those lower income school districts would have equal funding. You can write a law, but every year the legislature can change that law. So we rewrote the entire financing for education in California. Unfortunately, the legislature over the years has not maintained what we did way back there. And you're quite correct. You very well described the inequity. And that leads to the issue of the very first question you raised, which is continuing poverty and all of the problems that come with it. I'm going to duck out. We have another vote. This time, Bradley, I'm going to actually not listen to you, but make
Don't
sure I know
worry,
exactly
this one's the actual appropriations bill, and then everything, well, two more, and then all suspension bills. You're good.
Very good. I'm going to put this on mute. I'll be gone just a moment.
Another thing that we can actually do at the federal level, because unfortunately, as he was alluding to, most things are at the state level when it comes to especially K through 12 education. But one thing that the federal government has been derelict in its responsibility doing is what we call IDEA funding, Individuals with Disabilities Act. That was a fantastic bill that passed through Congress, and the president signed, that said that people with intellectual disabilities and physical disabilities actually too have to be able to have the same access to education and the appropriate resources to give them that same education. Problem was that was supposed to come with 40% of the funding to do that. So far, we've averaged about 9%. So Congress is pushing, and actually with one of our neighboring members of Congress, Jared Huffman, to fix that gap and fill in that shortfall. So that way there's actually more funding, because most of that makeup is coming out of the general fund, and that's coming from all other educational outlets.
The rest of that, Bradley, thank you very much. The rest of that is in the Build Back Better legislation, which has a major element, education element to it, including early childhood education, full funding for early childhood education. And that would be the pre-K education. So the federal government's pushing this. It's part of the Biden agenda. And unfortunately, we have a problem in the United States Senate. Every Republican is a no. And unfortunately, 2 Democrats refused to change the filibuster rule in the Senate. And it's stuck. Will we get it out? We'll find out. We've got about 5 months to get it done.
Okay. Thank you very much. Anybody has any questions, or should I continue with my own questions? Go ahead, Jim. Unmute yourself. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Congressman Garamendi. And this may be changed by now, but I've been following the evening news and Dr. Fauci talking about the additional COVID funding to invest in new kinds of vaccines and so forth. And of course, we don't know what's been going on, but this particular virus has really thrown a lot of curveballs. I just wonder if there's any update on some of that funding for investing in the future.
We've got a problem. The funding to fight COVID came in 3 different pieces of legislation over the last 17 months. The first was the American Rescue Plan, and that was a whopping amount of money for vaccinations, vaccine, setting up the mechanisms to distribute all of that, masks, you name it, as well as keeping the economy going. There were a couple of follow-up pieces that supplemented, filled in some blanks that we didn't get the first time around. About 2 months ago, we passed an additional piece of legislation about $16 billion. We were going to pass an additional piece of legislation to continue the vaccination research and vaccination programs and other efforts dealing directly with fighting COVID on the medical side. Some of that was to be paid for by money that was not spent in the earlier bill. And I think maybe 40% of that 16 billion were simply money that wasn't used for a variety of reasons around the nation. It turns out that both Democrat and Republicans who represented those states who did not use that money for many different reasons screamed, "Oh my God, you're taking away our money." Well, you didn't use your money. It's needed. We're going to repurpose it. Anyway, that whole thing is stalled out. And we are about to have a serious problem because the effort for vaccinations, new vaccines, research, and so forth, including PPPs and the like, all of that is about to dry up. So there's going to be a crunch. We're like, well, none of you, I'm sure, waited until the very last day to study for the exam. So we're kind of in that situation here. We're going to hit the wall here pretty quick. And at that point, we really must pass this legislation.
Thank you. Marianne? Unmute, please.
Thank you, Congressman Garamendi. I have a question regarding senior services and homelessness. As you, I am sure, aware that one of the largest groups of the increase in homeless are among seniors. And I have an interest in particularly how can we prevent that? And also the latest count of the homeless in Contra Costa County shows over 30% increase since 2019 in homelessness in our county. So we have a serious problem, and this also interfaces with climate change and wildfires. So these are all issues of concern for me: senior services, homelessness, and climate change and wildfires. That's a lot to take in, but I would welcome your wisdom and plans on this, on these topics.
Well, let's take the homeless question first. It turns out that the homeless issue is a very, very complex issue because there are multiple factors that create homelessness. The significant increase that you described in the last 3 years is principally due to the pandemic, the shutdown of the economy, people unable to pay rent, unable to find a job. That's probably the reason for the very significant increase in 2021 and partly into 22. The underlying homeless situation is, again, multifaceted. There are 2 things that we know are very common in homeless: mental health issues and drug abuse. Those programs, interestingly enough, are assisted by a community program funding that Representative Mike Thompson brought to Contra Costa County. I think it was a couple of $1 million to augment and to set up a specific program in the Contra Costa Health Department to deal with addiction and mental health among the homeless. That'll help, but that's an ongoing need, and the one-year funding was startup and organizational money. The question, will the county be able to continue to provide those services in that particular population? Also, for all of the homeless, assuming that they're capable of working, and there are reasons why some or maybe many cannot, but if they're capable of working, then that takes us back to the Workforce Investment Opportunity Act, which I talked about earlier, job training programs, various kinds of support programs to get people back into the workforce. And a particular group that this would apply to are those who became homeless during the pandemic. For the most part, they were in a stable or semi-stable situation, but that all collapsed as a result of the pandemic, the shutdown, the jobs, and so forth. So, just a quick review. That is a question. One more thing, and I'm going to jump up and vote on the next bill, which is
Domestic terror.
the Domestic Terrorism Act, which I think I talked about at the very opening. The veteran population. We have a specific program that we put into place about 7-8 years ago for homeless vets. This was a huge problem in the aftermath of the huge buildup in the Iraq and Afghanistan war, where we had 125,000 soldiers permanently in the field. They came back harmed and hurt in multiple ways, and many became homeless. In any case, we set up a specific program where they have a stipend. Habitat for Humanity, working with them in Solano County, we have built 3 6-unit housing programs specifically for those vets using that stipend with Habitat for Humanity. We intend to extend that into Contra Costa County. Bradley, I'll let you take over. I'm going to go mute and go vote.
And the other big thing is obviously housing capacity. We have a huge supply shortage, especially in Contra Costa. And his Home Act actually directly does that. It's about capacity building, not only new construction, which is going to be incredibly crucial, but I know all of us know, well, really, especially Richmond, but the whole area has also just unacceptable housing, which we know needs to be repaired. And that money could also be used for that, to upgrade, take care of lead piping, asbestos, even bad electrical, those sorts of things. So that way they're rehabilitated for low income housing as well.
Bradley, what monies are you talking about? I missed that.
This is under what we call the home funds, which the Congressman's Home Act would triple the funding for. It's the most flexible funding source for local governments to use for low income housing, capacity building.
Home
Is that-
funds?
It's home. So it's just home funding, HOME.
Oh. Is that available now?
It is. It's just underfunded. So we're, as the Congressman mentioned earlier, we're working the bill through the Financial Services Committee now to reauthorize it at a much higher level. But it is being used now by local authorities.
So it's a state program.
It's a federal. So it's federal money that goes down to the local jurisdictions.
Okay, thank you.
Very good. It may be time to explain how we vote. This is a voting card, and that's my voting card. It's something like a credit card. You know, all of my ID and other information's in this card, and we slip this into a slot. There are probably 40 different slots around, and there are 3 buttons. A red one is a no, a green one is a yes, and a yellow one is I don't know, otherwise voting present, which is very rarely done, but sometimes it's the appropriate vote to take, usually on some sort of obscure rule change. Or if you're going to establish a quorum. So if we know the votes that are up and they're not changing, which is sometimes happens, we're given a list like this of the votes that are up. And there's a recommendation from our caucus as to how to vote. And generally, Democrats will vote along with their caucus and the Republicans similarly with their caucus. Right now, the Republicans vote no on most everything. And the Democrats, since we control the House, these bills are either sponsored by Democrats or the Democrats find that they are acceptable. The only difference is there may be floor amendments for any one of these, and those may be proposed by both Democrats or Republicans. That usually happens this morning. Yesterday, where late into the evening, we were going through amendments on one of the bills. Several of those amendments were adopted, and then the bill was up for final vote this earlier today. So there's my voting card. Okay, we'll take the next question.
Marilyn, did you have a question or not?
I guess I do. I'm sort of following up on a prior question. One of the things that has not been happening is affordable senior housing, particularly if people need medical support. And of course, we all know this avalanche of Alzheimer's and other kinds of severe memory problems are coming at us as a society. And it seems like there hasn't been any action. However, I'm perfectly aware I may not have read about it, but maybe you could tell me if there's any thinking about this, because what I foresee is not only workers, because they talk about people to do the work, but we need housing that's supportive for these large populations, and it's already started.
Three things on that. First of all, I've been a sponsor over the last decade for Alzheimer's research. And you're quite correct. This is an avalanche. It is either now or will very soon be the most expensive medical issue ahead of heart disease and cancer. And it is, and the research, we keep looking for promising opportunities, and there seem to be, although some of the things that we were so enthusiastic about before COVID have been quietly put aside, not put aside, but have not been noticed because of the all of our attentions on COVID, or at least most of it. Nonetheless, we have continually ramped up the funding for Alzheimer's. It was just under $500 million a year. I think we're approaching $3 billion now. Is that about right?
4. Yeah, it's like 3.5. It's exciting.
You know, so every year I've been leading that together with a couple of other members. My mother-in-law died of Alzheimer's in our home, which brings me to the second point. In-home supportive services are a very good way to treat Alzheimer's, at least in the early and mid stages. At some point, it may become untenable. But if we can keep the person in their home, the individual does much better. That requires in-home care. And it turns out that in-home care is a whole lot cheaper than going into a facility. And in many cases, it's much better. Not in every case, but in many cases it is. So I've been a continued supporter of what is called in-home supportive care since 1978, when I became chairman of the Senate, California Senate Health and Welfare Committee, and we were addressing this issue of nursing homes, mid-level, as well as in-home care. So that's where all of this is. The facilities funding, Medicare principally, Medicare, Medicaid in some cases, continue to be a major part of the funding effort for it. All right, I'll take another question.
Thank you. Harpreet?
Good evening, Congressman, and good evening to everyone. Congressman, as you're aware, and all of us, sadly, once again, our country's gone through some horrific killings of innocent people, both as ethnically and religiously. And I'm quite aware of your record of making sure that this, on both of gun violence and protection of people. I've actually posted on our chat, DHS site is giving away about $1.6 billion in protection of places of faith. As you know, your new district is quite diversified ethnically, religiously, you name it, it's here, number of languages spoken. Unfortunately, we Sikh faith has been disproportionately affected by violence as well. And you've taken a great stand about it and making sure that we are all protected. But once again, I think you're always on the news talking about this. So your reaction to this week's of violence against all of us, perhaps, and all citizens of the U.S.
Harpreet, thank you. For those of you that may not know Harpreet, he's one of the national leaders among the Sikh community. And indeed, we have been working legislation here over as more than a decade now, dealing with this religious hatred and often coupled with racism. Harpreet, thank you for bringing up the money that is available. It's part of one of the pieces of legislation that we've passed here dealing with hate crime. And for all of the religious communities, we've seen this problem in the Sikh community. We've seen it in the Jewish community. Most recently, I believe it was a Presbyterian church in Orange County that was principally, I think it was Korean. So we have all of this, and then 2 days ago, the Buffalo situation. I spoke earlier about my legislation dealing with assault rifles, and that's still the law in California. The final author of that bill, which was taken over by Mr. Roberti, is still the law. Einstein's assault weapon ban sunsetted after 10 years and has not been able to be reinstated. Hate crime legislation, we work that here all the time, continuing to advance hate crime legislation, both in terms of penalty as well as money to set up programs to deal with hate crime. I can assure you right now, there is a lot of discussion about the internet and how to deal with that. Bradley, you might want to pick that up. I got to go use this card. I'll be back.
Thank you.
Yes, 7 more. It's going to be a long night. It's 10 o'clock here. Yeah, I'm sure you all are tracking how do we actually hold social media accountable. Right now, they have a blanket waiver for any content that's on their website. And how do we do that with obviously appropriate protocols on free speech, but not promoting hate? As you all might have heard, the grocery store that was had the shooting in Buffalo, he ahead of time was putting all the information on one of the most extreme websites. He was live streaming it on another website used for video games, which again, we can talk about some of the underlying issues that we're facing. And I think the big thing that we have to do, and the Congressman and I have talked about this more in the planning process of, we need to start community dialogues, because of course we have to focus on gun control. He's very, very passionate about that, but that's the tool. We need to deal with the actual hate that's behind it. And that's open dialogues and pointing out that, what is it called? Replacement theory is arcane and disgusting. And I hope none of you know what it is, but I'm sure you all do after the news this week. And we need to have frank conversations about it and really uplift our community, because we're a nation of immigrants. I don't see any Native Americans on this call, and we need to have a discussion about that.
Thank you.
Bradley, thank you. Thank you. I'm going to back up a bit here. We were talking about mental health a while ago. The bill that we're voting on now, and this will probably pass with and I would suspect Republican votes on this one. This has to do with traumatic brain injury and post-traumatic stress disorder and law enforcement training, so that the law enforcement officers understand and recognize this issue and recognize it as a mental health issue rather than, and deal with it in that way. And that brings us back to what we talked about earlier, and we were discussing the mental health. So once again, a piece of legislation that hopefully will become law and then be funded to deal with what is a very, very common problem on our streets. There's also another piece of this that has not yet become law, but is bouncing through the Judiciary Committee here. And that is a program that actually began in Orange County with a diversion program that a special court was set up to deal with veterans, starting with veterans who had PTSD or traumatic brain injury and were acting out, basically unable to act any other way than what they were doing, which was acting out. And instead of putting them into a criminal justice system, putting them into a mental health system. It's been very, very successful. It's been emulated. I know that Dana Beckham, who is the current district attorney, who I hope gets reelected, has such a program in Contra Costa County. And in her campaign talks about expanding this as part of the mental health program, also working with the police. And if this program gets the bill we just voting on right now, if it gets funded and she gets reelected, I would expect to see programs dealing with this kind of mental health problem.
Thank you very much, Congressman. I have one more question for you, using my privilege again. How do we stay in touch with you during your term? Our community has many needs. Let me just give you one example, back to the question that we don't have a hospital, aside from, need for economic development, education, everything. Our area is like a triangle. On one side, we have very high fire hazard severity zone. On the other side, we have Hayward Fault. And on top, we have Highway I-80, which is parallel to a major PG&E gas line transmission pipe. So in case of a major earthquake, we will lose our connection to Kaiser Hospital. To the other side, to the freeway, we'll be stuck here. No hospital, no heliport, no communication, community preparedness, no communication. We are happy to be living in this gorgeous area, but honestly, we are living with constant anxiety. We're doing our best. Actually, this group came together for emergency preparedness. It's called 94803 Emergency Preparedness Alliance. After 2 years, we just established a Fire Safe Council. We are working very hard with all authorities. My question is, educate us. 40% of us are foreign born, like myself, running for city council, but we need to learn the alphabet of politics. What can you do for us? How do we stay in touch? And how do we ask for resources and help from you? The most direct question.
And a very, very good question. We've not talked about climate change thus far. I'm just simply going to put it this way. I am almost a 50-year advocate of reducing carbon emissions. I spoke earlier about my 1978 legislation on solar, wind, and conservation. It turns out that actually conservation is the cheapest and almost one of the most immediate ways to reduce carbon emissions because you're reducing heating and cooling. So not going back into that, but we absolutely have to deal with that. That brings us to the refineries, the transition of the refineries through time to lower carbon emission using renewable resources, and eventually moving away from that entirely to wind, solar, renewables of various kinds. I keep looking at Jim Hansen, and I'm looking at the fire danger right over his shoulder, which brings me to the Oakland Hills fire, where I was the insurance commissioner. 9 months after becoming insurance commissioner, that fire ripped through the Oakland Berkeley Hills, and the insurance companies refused to pay. Part of the problem here, Sheila, is that the insurance companies, I made them pay, and I ended all kinds of insurance redlining. I talked about this earlier. Unfortunately, it's returned in a different form. It returns in the fear of fire. And so I have heard multiple stories, and I'm quite sure this is universal in the urban wildland interface in the hills in my district, that insurance is not available. And if it is, it's at a horrendous cost. I've had a conversation with Mark Levine, who is running for insurance commissioner, and told him if he ever wants my support, he's going to have to address this problem. And we'll see what comes of his primary election with Mr. Lura. But there's an insurance problem that is fundamental in all of this, including earthquake insurance. With regard to the hazards that you mentioned, they're very real. Earthquake hazard is a very, very real problem throughout the Bay Area. And there are very serious active faults that run through this entire district. And so with regard to earthquakes, there's an ongoing program at the state level to upgrade commercial buildings and also important civic buildings, hospitals, schools, and other civic buildings. Those actually go back some 40 years. That process is underway. The good news is we're constantly upgrading the requirements. The bad news is every time we upgrade the requirements, we've got to go back to what we thought we had done 20 or 30 years before and redo it to a higher standard. And we're simply going to have to do that. With regard to the freeways and the like, all of us know following the Loma Prieta earthquake, the collapse of the freeway in Oakland, and all of us have watched the continued improvement of the bridges and freeway structures. Those improvements are now going to continue with the Infrastructure and Jobs Act. There is $120 billion in that specifically for bridges. And we can expect some of that money, probably a great deal of that money, to wind up in California, specifically to deal with the earthquake issue of bridges. It's very, very important. Final point, and they just called another vote. Final point here, and Bradley, you can wrap this up, is that in the Infrastructure Jobs Act, there is money for forest protection. Almost all of it for the national forest, very little of it for the ongoing forest. A good deal of the land in the hills in Contra Costa County is part of the park system. And I've had discussions with the park system about what can be done in that regard. Bradley, I'm going to let you wrap up here.
Thank you very much, Congressman. We really appreciate your coming tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, and one other quick thing that I'll note, especially God knows, I'm thinking Point Richmond right now is a terrible route to have to deal with if something bad happened, is the congressman authored, God, I think in 2018, and we finally were able to get it included in 2021, something called the Escape Act, which would create all of the federal highway programs, and they would have a preference for critical escape routes for natural disasters.
Say it again slowly, please.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
okay.
Sorry. It's called the Escape Act, and we were able to pass it as a part of the Infrastructure and Jobs Act, the big bipartisan infrastructure bill. So it creates a federal highway administration preference for routes that are considered very important when it comes to natural disasters and the like.
So it creates those routes, or
So it would say to, let's say, your state, if they were applying, or the city, if this is a critical escape route, they are now more competitive for existing funds.
okay, we actually, our evacuation routes are the
Right.
most dangerous routes. How do we apply for it? And
Absolutely, yeah. And as the city's applying for funds from the Department of Transportation, they just need to put that everywhere now because of the congressman's legislation, they have a federal preference over other highway projects.
thank you very much, Bradley. You and I are going to be good friends. I'll stay in touch with you. Congressman Garamendi, we try not to keep our guests more than an hour. We really appreciate your coming despite your busy schedule and voting and being on the floor. I'm really grateful, and so is the community.
Well, Sohila, I'm gonna wrap it up with a couple of comments. The remaining bills are all for the veterans. The very last bill we have today deals with mammograms and medical options for veterans. And so we'll see what, that's just one more piece of what we can do here. You asked a question that I did not answer, but I think perhaps you've seen it in this discussion. And that is, how can we work together? And we do that by having a very, very good district staff team. Right now, my current district is 199.6 miles of the Sacramento River, basically starting at Benicia and going all the way up just short of Chico. It is a huge district, from the very top of the mountains of the Sierras to the highest mountains over on the coastal range. An enormous agricultural district in the middle of it, including the second or the most dangerous flood zone in America, the Sacramento River Valley and the city of Sacramento and other areas, including the Delta. We cover that district with an exceptional district staff who are always available. We have offices which we will choose during the, after the election, but learn where the best places are for the offices in this new 8th district, which includes the communities of Fairfield, Suisun City, Vallejo, and Benicia in Solano County, and then beginning with Kensington, El Cerrito, Richmond, all the way up Pinot, Fairfield, the other communities in between, Hercules. Did I say Fairfield? I meant Hercules, up to Crockett, Martinez, Pittsburgh, Bay Point, and Antioch at the 160 bridge in Antioch. It's an area that we will represent with district office and an extraordinary district staff that will be available to you and others. The pandemic has also given all of us a new tool, and we're using it tonight. I have determined that Zooming is an extraordinarily effective way to communicate and to learn. For example, today we've learned the issues that are on your mind. That helps me prioritize our time, our legislation, and my badgering of other members of Congress and the Senate on what we ought to be doing. So I intend to continue to do these. And Sohila, if you would like to continue to host these from time to time, I'll lean on you to do just that.
We would
And in
love
the process, okay. So that's, and in addition to that, Bradley spoke about town halls, which we will do. They are far more time consuming, and generally we cannot talk to as many people, but I do like them. The interpersonal relationships are different. I'm not going to say better, but they're different. So I think it's time for me to say goodbye, to thank you, and to look forward to another opportunity. Perhaps the next time we won't be voting during the course of it, but if we are, you'll understand how it can be done. So with that, good night. Thank you so very much.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
Bye now.
Have a nice evening. Bye. Bradley, do you know where the new office is going to be? The district office?
We don't know, and unfortunately, we technically can't start that process until January. So we will have a new federal budget. Right now, all of our budget has to go to the 3rd congressional district. Hopefully, knock on wood, winning an election, January 1st, we'd be able to start putting offices up. Obviously, there will be one in Contra Costa, and we can all read between lines that Richmond is the largest city that we would have in Contra Costa County. So can make assumptions.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. Both the congressman and yourself coming tonight. And as the congressman suggested, and we accept it wholeheartedly. We're going to be in touch.
Oh, would absolutely love that. You have my email and Henry's as well. Feel free to email me directly. I'll just put quickly in the chat, so hopefully everyone else has it too. If not, she has it, and our friend Harpreet knows how to get a hold of me too. But it's just bradley@garamendi.org. So feel free to email that. I may take a little bit to get back to him. I'm so sorry. I do 2 jobs. I run his campaign and wear a suit and run his official office. So give me a little time and feel free to badger me as well. So please do. We do want to stay in touch.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I just need to explain briefly to everyone that we had scheduled this meeting. Then apparently the House voting time changed. And I asked the congressman that I already invited the community, can you join us for 10, 15 minutes? And he did his best, as you saw, and we had him almost the whole time. So we're really grateful. We were very concerned that our small little community may not be visible. Now we're glad we're not only visible, we're connected, and we continue to be connected. Thank you so much. We'll stay in touch, and we hope to have this program every few months.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Sohaila.
Thank you, everyone, for
Thank you,
coming.
Bradley.
Thank you.
Have a nice evening. Good night.